It seems that there's a professor in Nottingham in England that has expressed really his dismay that so many people, I guess, enjoy Lord of the Rings. The professor's, basically his position is that the actual books demonize people of color. So I'm going to go through the article word for word and we'll see. So students taking a Nottingham University course entitled Decolonizing Tolkien et al. I just have to stop. There's no connection between Tolkien, colonialism, even the concepts of quote-unquote white man's burden or any of the stuff that I'm sure is going to come up in this article. My understanding of Tolkien up until now is probably mostly based on his faith. His focus was not on demonizing non-white people in any way, really. And I'm not saying that to cape for him, though, to be honest, because I think he's a really good writer, caping a little bit for him, maybe it's okay. Students taking a Nottingham University course entitled Decolonizing Tolkien et al. We learned this week are being taught that the Lord of the Rings demonizes people of color. I find this notion puzzling because I didn't think this great fantasy trilogy actually contained people of color. There are no people of color mentioned in the trilogies. Potentially maybe some kind of inference with the Easterlings that could be perceived to be mildly swarthy. And then, of course, swarthy actually means swarthy, and I'm swarthy. No, I don't really see that in his work. Potentially the Easterlings, but the Easterlings, not really a heavy presence. Okay, certainly the orcs are described as swart, i.e. swarthy, but they aren't people. They're monsters, horrible, ugly monsters. So if orcs make you think of black people, I'd politely suggest that it isn't Tolkien who's got a problem with race. So immediately when I came upon this concept as I was looking for ideas, I thought of the Malcolm X quote, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz. And he's got this quote about how often, and I'm paraphrasing, the more dangerous person is actually often the white liberal. And he's talking about that, of course, for colored people.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. And you take him for a friend.
And I say that because the article, of course, and the professor inserted people of color in really a universe that is lily white, if we're going to get there. And my point is, I actually agree with the guy who wrote this article. I believe the gentleman's Christopher Lee. I'll double check when I finish going through it. But that if the orcs, you think the orcs are quote unquote Negroes or any type of melanated human being, then there's something wrong with your mind. And that's you. That's not Tolkien. You know what I mean? That's your mind. You get me? I'll say, actually, to be honest, as a side note, I believe that The hobbits at times were described as swarthy individuals. So if you want to posit that there might have been some hobbits that might have been melanated, that would be probably a little bit closer to reality than a bunch of monsters. So I have to correct something I just said and say that, okay, the actual Swartings or swarthy men, leading back to a legendary character, and I'm quoting Tolkien Gateway. So the Easterlings were swarthy men, but outside of that, that's no connection really to the actual orcs. So if you want to get really deep into the conversation of why are they swarthy men, or connected to Sauron, yeah, okay, that conversation can be had, but that conversation still is not really a conversation about, at least to my mind, about Tolkien creating a oppressive universe where people of color are being held down in some way. And then going back to my original point where I did the segue, there's just this whole kind of conception of really this idea that originally, like the Harfoots, and I'm referencing Tolkien's Gateway, the Harfoots were swarthy hobbits. So they were a third version of the hobbits. So contextually, in terms of like Tolkien's universe, you could have Harfoots who were swarthy, non-white. Once again, none of that would once again predicate having people that be down by Tolkien's universe. Because, for example, if we reference the last group of people that actually have a contingent, which would be swarthy people, the Harfoots or the hobbits in general are not really characterized in Tolkien's universe as being an unhealthy people, self-centered, so forth and so on. Unlike a famous series on Amazon, they're characterized in a benevolent way. So if we really want to get into quote unquote, inserting, we need to insert the black and white status into Tolkien's universe. Okay, so be it. But still, I'm just in the first paragraph, and it already makes absolutely no sense what the cat is saying. And I'm just giving you examples from Tolkien's actual universe. So still, this isn't the first time such a claim has been made. In 2002, a writer in The Guardian thundered, "The Lord of the Rings is racist. It is soaked in the logic that race determines behavior. The races that Tolkien has put on the side of evil are then given a rag bag of non-white characteristics that could have been copied straight from a BNP leaflet. Dark, slanty-eyed, swarthy, broad-faced." I think the only thing, and that has come up a couple times. Let's look at some of the quote-unquote good races. So there's been a mention, as far as the dwarfs, that maybe the dwarfs kind of characteristic or characterize the religious people or really Jewish people. So that's kind of... I really think that a lot of stuff that happens, there's a lot of people inserting stuff from a modern perspective, from 2025, on an author whose worldview was completely different. So the author goes on to say, well, all right, I suppose that's true of some of the baddies. A far more significant villain, however, is Saruman, who, as well as being a man, rather than some form of mythical beast, is white. Indeed, he's even referred to as Saruman the White, Does this mean that Tolkien was demonizing white people too? So, yeah, despite what the author just said, I think that the actual way that they titled Saruman has to do with his hair's appearance. But I'm going to correct myself as I go along. So, of course, I made a mistake. I said Christopher Lee, who is the actor who plays Saruman the White. Christopher Lee, of course, is not the author of the article. The author of the article is a chap by the name of Michael Deacon. So, to wrap up this part of this column, oddly enough, I've never heard any academics or Guardian's writers make that particular claim, and he's talking about the claim of demonizing quote-unquote white people. But this isn't the only problem I have with their logic, because if giving a fictional villain dark skin demonizes non-white people, does it mean fictional villains must never be non-white? Not even if they're, say, Islamist terrorists? Or does it mean that to avoid demonizing anyone, works of fiction shouldn't contain any villains at all? I mean, to be honest, though, my only problem with what he's saying is that, unfortunately, in 2025, as we've seen with some of the series, we've seen it with The Rings of Power turning Sauron into a lover boy. We've kind of seen this new thing in the pandemic's era especially, but maybe even in this whole idiocracy era that we've been in for at least 10 or 11 years, this whole idea that nothing's bad, everything is good, down is up, left is right. So I just don't know if we want to open up that door necessarily. By that I mean that really kind of opening that door in terms of this article, because I don't know how that directly ties to the quote-unquote ethnicity or quote-unquote phenotype or levels of melanin or type of melanin you have in your skin. And really, I think that what I want to say about the whole concept, or my understanding of what's going on at the school, it doesn't serve any of the students, and it definitely doesn't serve any of the quote-unquote black Brits or the Asian students in the school. It's definitely not serving them to have this conversation at school. It's better for them to read Tolkien themselves. And they can read Tolkien themselves and come to their own determinations on an individual basis. For example, Jamal might have the perception that Lord of the Rings is a great book, and then Sharif might have a different interpretation. Ian may see that this is really dry literature, I don't like it at all. But these are all things you want to let the young people decide for themselves as they're reading the document, and then they're presenting, whether it's a thesis paper or it's an essay, to you, the instructor. The biggest issues I have with this pandemic era, and then even the era of artificial intelligence, despite the fact that I'm relatively pro-artificial intelligence, is there's a lot of like 1984 kind of stuff and like controlling that we approach thinking. We just don't want people to think. It's kind of weird, don't you think? With that, if you want, go ahead, like, subscribe, buy me a coffee, share this, watch it 10 times. I'm playing. I'll see you.